Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. Today we are in northern Rush County, Indiana at the Shiloh Cemetery with Marilyn Gray Roberts. Hi Marilyn, how are you doing today?
Hello Sarah, I'm just fine.
Wonderful. So tell me, when did the history of Shiloh Cemetery begin?
The history of Shiloh Cemetery actually begins with the very earliest pioneers in this area. John Montgomery Huddleston from Bourbon County, Kentucky, visited Rush County in about 1824, and then he returned in 1828 with his wife, Catherine Irwin, and 6 of their sons, 3 of their daughter-in-laws, and then 6 grandchildren. John Montgomery Huddleston can trace his roots back to noblemen in England, and he was a very well-respected person of his time. He settled here in the township. His sons branched out in a 5-mile radius extending into the neighboring county of Henry. They settled farms and began to raise their children and establish a community. John Montgomery Huddleston's sons, John Miller and Robert Irwin, went on to be legislators in the state of Indiana. The first recorded burial here in Shiloh Cemetery was John Miller's wife, Matilda, and she died in 1837.
So I understand there was a church.
Yes, the Sutton family were members of the Associated Reformed Presbyterian Church, and they brought that denomination with them here to Center Township. And the first church was actually to the south of where we're sitting now. It was a log cabin. And the Huddleston family donated the land for the cemetery and the church. That church then built a new church 8 years later across the road in 1840. And that church sat adjacent to the school that had been built directly across from the cemetery. The Presbyterian faith was very important to the early settlers. However, in about 1903, the church split over controversy with the Ku Klux Klan and the members who were and the members who weren't. So some of the congregation went to the nearby town of Mays and built a new church. The little Shiloh church was open until 1912 and just didn't retain enough membership to stay open. However, the church remained, the building did, and they would use it to house family that came from far away for funerals and even for funeral services. In 1938, that church was torn down and a neighboring farmer bought the lumber and moved it to his farm and reconstructed it into a barn. The Mays Presbyterian Church remained open until 1938, and it sat vacant many, many years. In 1960, a gentleman bought it and remodeled it into a home for his 6 children and wife, and that building is still a home to this day, and some of the original family members live there.
So who are other pioneer families of Shiloh?
A good example is the Sutton family. Life was so hard on the plains of Indiana. Even though there's lots of trees, they were very busily clearing the land to farm. And there were many difficulties and deaths with childbirth, diseases, and accidents. There are 8 children here that passed away from the Sutton family that all died under the age of 13. Then there is the Bell family. John and Margaret Kennedy Bell came to this area in the very early 1900s. They settled along with the Huddlestons and were involved in the Associated Reformed Presbyterian Church. They staked land in the area. Their daughter, Charity Bell, married her first cousin, James Bell, from Union County, and he came to this area and joined his father-in-law in farming. The Bells raised fine horses and were known, and that was part of their business besides farming. And then Samuel Bell was one of their sons, and Samuel was a progressive farmer plus an entrepreneur. As a young man, he farmed with his family, but then he left the area and lived several places as far west as St. Louis and was involved in the lumber business. He eventually came back to Rush County and owned and cultivated 100 acres and owned a brick and tile business. Dr. Clarence Atkins is buried here. He was a well-known ear, nose, and throat specialist in Rushville in the mid-20th century. His ancestors go back to the Huddlesons, and his family farm was just to the west of where we are now.
So are there any other interesting facts about Shiloh?
One interesting fact is that several of the families that were pioneer families still have ancestors living in this area, continuing to farm or be involved in business here in Rush County. Another interesting fact is that there are African Americans buried here, and some of the graves are marked with a last name only, and some are marked without a name, but that is an interesting fact. And then the road that is out here in front of us travels down to the town of Mays. And in Mays is still the building that was the original livery stable back in the late 1800s, and of course the remodeled house of the church. And so those are interesting facts. To conclude, I'd like to honor Esther Oldham. Esther compiled much of the history that we know about. In 1975, she worked diligently with the Henry County Genealogical Society, and Esther lived in this community to the age of 103. She worked very hard in promoting Center Township and the heritage of Center Township. So we thank her, and her husband, Clarence Oldham, was a direct descendant of the Huddleston family.
Well, a big thank you to Esther then. Thanks so much for watching another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. Today we were in northern Rush County, Indiana at the Shiloh Cemetery here with Marilyn Gray Roberts. Now remember, travel slowly and stop often. Bye.